Welcome to The PA is In, the show created by PAs for PAs, where codependency with your supervising physician is a thing of the past, optimal team practice is the future, and physician associate has taken the place of physician assistant as the professional title of choice. I'm Tracy Bingaman, and I'm obsessed with redefining what success as a PA looks like and what it feels like. Here you'll find the mindset shifts, systems, and processes I use to escape healthcare burnout and integrate my work into my life. Work-life balance is a myth, and an integrated life where you thrive professionally, not a balancing act, is the goal here. My mission is to help you to grow into a unicorn PA who loves their job, has abundant energy, time to spare, and work-optional financial freedom. The PA is in. You know those fields of medicine where they just seem so interesting to you, but you're wondering, do PAs even practice in that specific field of medicine? For me, one of those fields has always been ophthalmology. So ophthalmology is an area that PAs can practice in. In fact, there are just under 80 PAs practicing in the US in the field of ophthalmology. And one of them, my favorite ophthalmology PA, don't tell the others, is Joel Ciolek. So Joel is our guest on today's episode. He is going to tell us all about how he got into the field of ophthalmology, how ophthalmology chose him. And then we're going to dive into some of the deeper topics of what it's like to thrive as a PA, how to make sure you're avoiding contract red flags, and more. So without further ado, here he is, Joel Ciolek. Joel, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Awesome. So we're going to jump right in. Right now in the US, there are less than 80 PAs that are practicing in the field of ophthalmology. And it sounds like you have had your sights set on ophthalmology since you were a pre-PA student. So I would love it if you would share sort of how you got into this field and what that journey looked like for you.
Yes, so you are correct. Ophthalmology found me as a pre-PA. So honestly, how I got into the field was through a handshake. Allow me to explain further. I'm born and raised outside of Seattle, Washington, so West Coast, and I was going to undergrad at a school in the East Coast. So naturally, there wasn't a lot of people from Seattle. And there was a student, we were walking to the same class, and he was wearing a Seattle Seahawks jersey. I don't know if you guys are football fans out there, but when I saw a Seattle Seahawks, I was like, that's odd. So I kind of took a chance and was like, hey, are you from Seattle? And he's like, no, I was born there. And so basically, long story short, he became one of my best friends at college, and his father was an ophthalmologist. And so I would go home with a family on weekends. They kind of took me in as one of their kids during college. And so as a pre-med, pre-PA undergrad, he was encouraging me, you should look into ophthalmology. And so when I finished undergrad, I went back home and I knew a family friend, optometrist. And so I kind of shadowed an optometrist that I knew just to kind of see, do I want to do optometry? Do I want to do ophthalmology? And really from this exposure, and after shadowing for a month, they offered me a job. And so that's how I got my pre-PA clinical experience. They trained me on the job in ophthalmology. And during that, I quickly found I love ophthalmology more so than optometry. There are differences. But I also knew I wanted to be a PA. And so at the time, I was like, well, I don't know anyone doing this, but I'm just going to figure it out. And so I went to PA school with the intent to do ophthalmology. I loved other parts of PA school, but it was always there. And so I'm very thrilled to be getting to actually do, and I can't believe it literally was through a handshake to a stranger that got it all started. So you never know where life will take you.
Absolutely. That is so true. So since you have experience in both fields, can you clarify maybe for me, pretend I don't know, or to anyone listening, what is the actual difference between ophthalmology and optometry?
Yeah, great question. So ophthalmology, to be an ophthalmologist, you go to medical school and then you do a 4-year ophthalmology residency. And then if you want to specialize in a fellowship, you can do another 1 or 2 years. An optometrist, they do undergrad and then they go to 4 years of optometry school. So think similarly to say a dentist where they go to dental school. There's optometry school. An optometrist versus an ophthalmologist, scope of practice, there's a lot of things that are very similar in the clinical aspect. But an optometrist would not have any surgical scope. They're not a surgeon, whereas an ophthalmologist would be an eye surgeon. An optometrist will also manage more of the optical side of things, so more of the glasses, the contacts. They still can do a bunch of medical optometry where they can see, clinical patients for medical ophthalmology, but they do manage more of the optical side. And so that's truly where, when I was torn between, do I do optometry, ophthalmology, it really, once I started working in the field and got to see it, I worked with an optometrist that was very more medical optometry and less of the optical, but I did find myself drawn more to the medical surgical side of ophthalmology, less of the better one, better two, better one, better two. And so that was kind of my reasoning to branch off from optometry. Again, there are optometrists they don't do that. They'll strictly do more the medical side, but I just felt I aligned more with the ophthalmology side. So that's the difference between the two in a gist.
And are there PAs working in optometry that you know of?
Okay, so great question. It's one I'm commonly asked because a lot of people are like, why do you have a PA in ophthalmology when there's already another clinician for ophthalmology, right? Um, and so it depends on the state you're in. Certain states do not allow a PA to perform the refractive nature of an eye. So as a PA in ophthalmology, I can totally check someone's vision, eye pressure, do an eye exam, imaging, administer treatment, procedures, assist with surgery. But in the state that I'm in, California, I am not allowed to prescribe glasses or contact lenses. It's a state limitation. So there are states that do allow a PA to do that. And so it really goes down to know your state laws. I think a lot of times PAs assume it's up to them in the supervising physician, and that's not always the case. There are barriers to that. For me, on a personal note, it does not bother me because I don't really want to do glasses. So I'm like, it's fine. But at the same time, that is a restriction. Whereas some PAs I know in ophthalmology, they have a full optometry scope as well.
Okay. So some overlap, but really state to state is going to depend.
Yes. That said, to me, the utilization of a PA in a clinic, PAs are allowed to do things on the ophthalmology side that an optometrist isn't. And so, in that sense, to be a PA in ophthalmology, you do want to cater more to those clinics that would use your skill set more, just because, for example, like if most common procedure I do is an intravitreal injection, which is a treatment that we inject medicine in the eye for macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, things like that. An optometrist can't do that procedure, whereas me as a PA or an ophthalmologist can. So that's also your way to show the difference between your role as a PA versus an optometrist, so everyone can get along. I work with 10 optometrists. We all get along great. No one feels like we're taking patients from each other. There's no conflict of interest. We all have the things we do, and we recognize there are differences, and we're all needed.
Yeah. I think that sort of strategically carving out, this is what I do. This is what I can do legally. This is what I want to do. There's this sweet spot between, it's like if there's a Venn diagram, this is what I want to be doing. This is what legally I can be doing. This is what no one in my practice feels threatened by me doing. Like the stuff in the middle, if you can find a place where all three of those things overlap and it's really what you want to be doing, that's a really great place to be.
You summarized it to a T, and that's kind of what I envisioned as a pre-P in the clinic scene. I think this is possible, and so we're going to go for it. Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that as a PA student or even as a pre-PA student, you picked a field where you didn't see any PAs modeling it. So it doesn't sound like you had a PA that you were like, oh, that's what I want to do. You saw the physician doing it and you said, that's what I want to do. So let's talk a little bit about what it's been like to trailblaze this field for PAs. So I think personally, I think we need more of this. I think we need more PAs saying like, yeah, I want to do anesthesia. Yeah, I want to do ophthalmology. Yeah, I want to do some field that we haven't yet broken into. Why not me? Why can't I be the first?
Absolutely. It's a fair question. I would say the only reason I was able to pursue this so strongly and like for how long it took, because it did not happen overnight, is because it really is rooted in passion. I love ophthalmology and I love ophthalmology patients. And if I didn't have those mentors or those patients or just a passion for it, then I think the learning curve and the trailblazing it took to get here, I wouldn't have followed through on it. So I would say if anyone's out there listening and you actually are like, oh, this sounds fun. It's like, well, is it fun or is it really passion? Because you don't come out of PA school prepared to work in ophthalmology. I had a 3-hour lecture in didactic year. Ophthalmology is an elective rotation. My program didn't even have elective rotations in ophthalmology. I made both of them myself. I went to my home clinic. I told them, here's what I want to do. This is the skills I need to prepare for to be a PA in ophthalmology. I'm not here to function like your tech again. So I was able to really kind of take ownership of that. And then I applied to Duke PA program. I wasn't a Duke PA student, but Duke PA program allowed a PA visiting student to do certain rotations. I couldn't take a rotation like emergency medicine because their students needed it. But to my luck, no one wanted ophthalmology. And so I applied there and I got into their program as a visiting student and then was able to rotate in ophthalmology there. And so I try to maximize my time in PA school to help the onboarding because it is an undertaking. Transition upon graduation, I'm not lying, no exaggeration, I cold called 300 clinics asking, are you interested? Because I felt like a salesman. I'm pitching this idea, but it's really just theory. I can't say I've done it and no one knows it. And the fact of the matter is ophthalmologists don't know you're an option. So they're not looking for you. They don't know you can even do this. And so it was no, 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 no. I ended up doing family medicine to do something until I found it. And I finally got a yes. So it really does take one yes, but I did have to find someone who was willing to see the value of the relationship before we actually did it, and then be patient with really that learning curve of figuring out how is the role and how do you structure onboarding, which I can talk about that through. But it was really rooted because I was passionate about it. Otherwise, I don't think I would have followed through how long it took to actually make happen.
So how long from PA school graduation to you starting your actual ophthalmology job? What was that like?
1 year.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1 year. Like I said, was doing family medicine, and then I was around 9 months there, and then I got an opportunity, but it was another like 3 months to get like credentialed and stuff to actually start. So that whole time I was pitching it, and it really does take a yes. And since then, it's been great. The onboarding is pretty severe to undertaking just because you don't come out of school. For me, I think it was more manageable because I worked in ophthalmology beforehand. So if you're listening and you're really interested in doing ophthalmology, if you have no background, plan on at minimum 6 months. If you have some background, for me, I was up to speed within a month. But that's also because I was really maximizing what I did off in PA school too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You weren't starting from zero when you got there. Yeah. Yeah. So I understand that in all of the free time that you have, that you're not working or ruling the world, that you have a consulting business where you help either ophthalmology practices sort of figure out how a PA could be valuable to them or other PAs who are interested in going into ophthalmology. So how do you serve PAs and practices in that way?
Yeah, so basically, once I figured out I wanted to do this and I started doing that, and then I started sharing my experience to kind of show representation, I was shocked at how many people had similar stories like mine. They worked in ophthalmology before, they went to PA school, they were told PAs don't work in ophthalmology. I had people reaching out to me, I've been a PA for 10 years. I was told I never could get back there. I miss it so much. I had pre-PAs. I work in ophthalmology. I love it. I want to do this. Students, all these people. And so I started getting like, I would say probably on average once a week, just messages from people. And I realized, oh, I'm not alone in this. There are other people there. But even professionally, I feel very alone because I don't have PA colleagues I work with. I don't know anyone else doing this. So I wanted a way to bring people together who had similar passions. And so I created what's called OPAC, Ophthalmology Physician Assistant Consulting. And the whole motivation behind it was just to connect either pre-PAs who worked in the field before that wanted to find rotations in ophthalmology or a potential job, to connect PAs who either were looking for a job or had experience, or just I know several that they didn't get exposed to it until they did PA school, and then they kind of found out they liked it. And then I found to reconcile that, I wanted to work with practices who had interest. And so it's just a way to bring people together And I basically provide consultation on how to onboard successfully. There's definitely things I've learned in doing this. And so kind of you get to learn from my mistakes, trial by error. I help talk about contract negotiation. I'm one of 80 PAs in the world that do ophtho. So you're not one of thousands. You're not very replaceable. So your contract really teaching people how to know your value and your worth. Especially even though you might be quote unquote a new grad PA, but if you worked in ophthalmology before, you have more experience than probably any other PA that's applying for it. And so I quickly saw how if I followed the norm of like PA structure, salary, and onboarding, that did not mirror image my value, because then I started getting offers from practices once a week. Hey, would you come work with us? Want to work with us? And suddenly it became a, no to we want you, we want you. And so that was my way to kind of start accumulating practices. And so I've been able to connect practices with PAs that either want to do this or have experience. And it's been really great to see it grow. And so now it's growing. It's really cool to see how like when we started versus now. I've connected to, there's 2 countries that utilize PAs in ophthalmology, the Netherlands and Kenya. In Kenya, they call them clinical officers. They're not PAs there. And then I'm currently in conversation with Ireland. Ireland is new to the PA profession and they're wanting to implement PAs in ophthalmology there. And so you literally like that handshake took me domestically and now globally. It's so fun to see it grow. It's super cool.
What you're telling me is you're changing the world
No,
of medicine.
no, I just, again, truly passions demand relationships. I truly have learned that they draw people together and you have to be rooted in that. And that's what's going to get you from the next thing to the next things. I had mentors that took me, a kid who knew nothing about ophthalmology, and got me up and going. And then I had people who gave me a job to do it. And now to be able to extend that back to someone, it's fantastic. It's just a full circle moment that one thing I think is life is about, you know?
One of my very favorite things about being a podcaster is crossing paths with other incredible podcasters. If you love this show, especially when I share about my experience with healthcare burnout and recovery, you're going to want to check out the podcast, Burnout, What I've Learned So Far, hosted by my friend Meg Letty. Meg is a former CT surgery PA turned advocate for healthcare provider wellness. Turn in to hear how she recovered from burnout and integrated well-being into her life to create a life of dreams, not nightmares. Add Burnout, What I Have Learned So Far with Meg Letty to your podcast queue to start your journey to wellness and healing today. And I also think when you're a part of this community of a relatively small number, just having a network of other people that you can call and say like, hey, my practice is asking me to do this, or they're trying to change my template, or, this many patients a day. Is that reasonable? Because like, ophthalmology, is this reasonable, is very different than family practice, is very different than plastic surgery, and if the group is so small, you can't go on the PA Facebook group and just say like, hey, is this reasonable? Because you're going to get answers from all these people who really don't get it, right? Because they haven't practiced in that specific specialty.
No, you're reading my mind. Professionally, early on, I felt very alone, just on an island. And that was one thing I also reconciled a few years ago is I, for lack of a better word, stopped everyone and just Google searched and started like finding emails in ways. And so informally, I created an informal email group that kind of started with about 50 of us across the country who were doing this and get everyone connected. And that's what the motivation was, to have someone you can have as a sounding board. I mean, I just today got an email from a PA in upstate New York who's ophthalmology saying, hey, this billing code is getting denied now. Is anyone else having issues with that? And it's so nice to be able to have that for each other. We did officially get approved within AAPA as a SO. SO is a specialty organization. And so there's like dermatology physician assistants. There was none for ophthalmology. So we are trying to move from like more informal to more formality, but that takes time. So TBD.
Yeah, but I think that even talking about it means that you're sharing and you're increasing visibility, and someone could be listening to this that thought, "Oh, I can't do that." Because I think that there's like, oh, in general, I know in theory, PAs can work in any area of medicine in any state of the United States. And then there's actually hearing, this is me, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm practicing, this is where I live. It's a very different, it's just much more concrete for someone to latch on to. Like, oh, in theory you can, but like, what do the laws say? And how does it actually work? So I'd love it if you could share a little bit about what your sort of like schedule is, how many patients you see in a day, what sort of like a day in the life or a week that, what that looks like for you.
Totally. So for me, ophthalmology is obviously a specialty. There's a lot of subspecialties in ophthalmology. So I do comprehensive ophthalmology, which just think more your bread and butter ophthalmology. But I do specialize in addition to that in medical retina, which is basically retina conditions that we treat in the clinic through procedures and things like that. But then I also do vitreoretinal surgery, so I have a surgical side. And then the other subspecialty in ophthalmology that I love is oculoplastics. So you might relate to this a little bit. And so that is the basically cosmetic and reconstructive area of the eyelids and the orbit and the nasolacrimal system. And then some practices also do the face. So I would say the two highest yield areas within ophthalmology for PA utilization would be on retina and oculoplastics. But you can do other parts as well. It just depends on the practice in your in setting. But again, look more for those strong medical surgical practices who will have you that exposure. I knew I wanted a blend of clinic and surgery. And so I knew I needed to do retina and oculoplastics in that sense to get that. Another thing I would say in learning this is not every surgery allows a PA for Cystic B to be built. And there's a lot of eye surgeries that don't qualify for you to be there. And so I started seeing like what a way you could potentially get taken advantage of. Let's just say in theory, you're paid off production as a PA in ophthalmology. And now you're spending your time in an OR and you're assisting on surgeries that you don't get billed to be there for. Now you're just got taken advantage of your contract. And so really learning which surgeries in ophthalmology allow you to actually physically be there, allow that reimbursement, how to set up your contract to be a mirror image of those things, which you're primarily find on the surgical side, it'd be more in your retina and oculoplastics. Yeah.
And do you have this issue that other surgical subspecialties see where you're seeing pre and post op globals that aren't associated with actually generating revenue and that can ding your productivity?
Yes, exactly. And I love that you bring that up. It's really interesting as you just learn as you get older, these little things where, oh yeah, we'll have you see post-ops and, oh, sure, no problem. And then you start realizing like, oh, they just took advantage of my time. And so really, again, going into the practice, know what you're signing up for and know how the contract's written. So I will say in private practice ophthalmology, very large volume of patients. When I was working as a pre-PA, we were seeing at least 50 a day at minimum. And so in that environment, ophthalmology is a very team sport. We have technicians to room patients, scribes, a lot of our imaging, everything's in house. I love it. I very rarely have to send a patient out for something. I can just do it all in their one visit. And so you have a lot of ancillary staff. So seeing that many is very possible. And in that setting, production would make a lot of sense. I don't work in private practice, and so I don't see that many. I see maximum up to like 17 or 18 a day. And so I have less support. So in my area, given that I'm also spending several days in the OR, not in the clinic, I chose to not be paid off production because I didn't feel the environment I was in really amplify that. That said, I did negotiate to not just be a salary, but I also knew in the OR, as you probably know, time goes longer than an 8-hour day. And so I basically negotiated where I want to be paid per hour. And so if I'm ever staying late after clinic to chart, I'm paid for that time. Just ways to really find how your practice is and which contract really allows that to maximize yourself and your time.
Yeah. For me, and in my personal experience clinically, and also when I'm working with clients, being paid on production sounds great. Like everyone thinks that that's going to be best for them because they're like, oh, I just know I'm making a ton of money for the hospital. And that's almost always true. But whether or not that money is something you're directly generating. So in order to be paid on production, have it make sense, it has to still be that they still make money on you because they still have to pay your benefits and all this other stuff. Otherwise, you're not a great bet for them. And you have to be directly generating the revenue or somehow capturing that revenue that someone else is making. So if you're seeing a ton of pre and post op globals, fine, but are you accounting for your physician's increased productivity because you're seeing those? Because if you're not, it's free. You're giving away that time if you're on production.
Absolutely. And then the other thing too, with this conversation, I find ophthalmology, there is pediatric ophthalmology, obviously, but across the board, for the most part, it's geriatric population, and a lot of eye conditions are just occur later in life. So most of your patients are going to be on Medicare, which reimburses you a lot less than a private insurance. So if you're doing production and you're doing medical retina, which is basically treating elderly patients, most of them with macular degeneration, but there's young ones with diabetes. But if most of your patients are Medicare, you're going to see just a lot more patients to get up there. And so now you're really working really hard, and that can be a long day and taxing, and then you get burned out. So also, I think just knowing your demographics and asking those questions of what's the insurance percentage ratios, and making sure that your schedule get access to some of those private insurances if that's how you want to go about it as well.
I think if there's anything that I have learned in my practice as a PA, if I could go back and tell like PA student Tracy anything, I would say when you're applying for a job, ask 100 times more questions than you're planning on asking.
I love that you say that. Okay, full transparency. I'm going through that currently in my current role. There's been about 7 things that I've had to actually go back and retroactively get back because they were wrong. Now, I do believe people were doing their best. It wasn't intentional. I think my life is better when I believe people are doing their best. It keeps me out of judgment, helps me focus on what is, not on like what could or should be. But I did learn from that, like read the fine print, ask all the questions, be your own advocate. A lesson learned is a lesson shared. So tell it, share it, and gratefully they responded well to it. And going forward it won't be, but here I'm having to retroactively do things that if I actually just asked questions, it would have never happened to begin with. So I can't encourage and emphasize and reiterate that enough for all you new grad PAs out there.
Yeah. And it doesn't make you seem stupid. It makes you seem thorough and interested and like you actually care. When I first graduated, I thought, well, if I ask questions about when this 401k match starts, they're going to think I don't know what I'm doing, which by the way, at the time, I didn't. So why I didn't want them to know that, I have absolutely no idea. But I was like, that would be terrible, right? If they thought I'm 22 and I don't fully understand how 401k match works, like they're going to know I'm an idiot. Like, ask the question, does it start immediately? Or is it, 3 months after I start? Or is it fully vested? Do I take it when I leave? Like, they're going to either know or be able to find out. And if I were an employer, I would want someone who cares enough to ask the hard questions. And even if it's just not, it's like, oh, I think this means 4 weeks of vacation and I work 4 days a week. I think it means 16 days, but it might mean 20. And I want to know what it means. Like, that doesn't mean you're dumb. That just means they weren't clear in what they put.
Absolutely. I mean, example on where I currently at, where it's like you're given this many education hours per year, and it sounds great. But then when you read the fine print, you're actually only allowed up to 5 days per year for education. So you get more hours than you can actually use per year. And so then it's like, oh, they rolled over. So if you don't use it, it rolls over. Okay, but not really, because if I don't use it,
I only have 5 days.
5 days a year. Exactly. So yeah, I hear you. I remember my first job too in family medicine. Then I remember the manager, she was like, no one has asked me this level of detail of questions before. And at first I was like, oh, does she view me, like you said, like, am I like threatening now, or like am I
a troublemaker? Are you like going to be a bad
candidate? Yeah. And I was shocked to learn how the 401k worked. I mean, I couldn't contribute until I was there for 5 years. I've never had any employer wait 5 years before I could contribute, and then you had to be 5 years vested in order to keep it. And it was, there was just, well, their match, obviously. And looking back on it, I was like, oh, how I would never have taken that. But I just didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually had some instances. I'm trying to say this very carefully.
I know, me too. I'm like catching myself.
So I've had an instance in the past where I actually had a contract that said you can't contribute to the simple IRA or the 401k until X amount of time has elapsed. And I was there a year and I Googled it and I like realized that in our state, you can't actually prohibit people for a certain amount of time if they're full time and they've been there 12 months, that they have to be allowed access. And so like I went to the HR people and I said like, how do I say this nicely? I think this is wrong. Like, I think you were trying to keep me out of this, not intentionally. Again, I don't think that they were saying, like, haha, let's make it so people can't contribute. I think that they had a fair amount of turnover and they were trying to make sure that when, if they were going to do the match, you had to be full time, you had to be there for 2 years. But the law said if you're full time in there for 12 months or 10 out of the last 12 months, you could contribute. And so they said, okay, we're going to get you set up. And then they were like pulling out the list of the other people who worked at my practice to see who else they needed to notify that they also could contribute because no one had come forward. And I almost didn't. I was almost like, what's one more year? Like, no, ask questions and you can do that from a place of not like, you guys are idiots. How could you have done this? Just like, hey, I found this. I looked this up. I found this. I wanted to know what you think about it. Is this accurate? Is this something that we can work on together?
And I think it's telling how they respond to that. If they own it and say, we're sorry, you're right, and we move forward together, it's great. Then I can accept that as a mistake. But if someone responds more and you feel like you're shamed by bringing it up, well, that's also a cue to how the relationship may function going forward. And so it only serves you well to bring it up. You either get what you needed and advocated for, and you can move forward in a healthy way, or you realize, oh, I might need to look elsewhere.
Yeah. Let's talk about, we did not plan this, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. Since we're talking about this, let's talk about I want to call them like relationship red flags, but for employers. So what are those things that if you're consulting with someone or you're speaking to one of your colleagues and they say, oh yeah, this potential practice said, did, or made me feel this way. What are you saying? Like, run.
Okay. The first one that comes to mind is I had a PA, they graduated and they worked in ophthalmology before, and they had an offer in ophthalmology, and the clinic said, well, you're a new grad and you're going to require a lot of training, so we're going to hire you at $40,000 a year and spend a year working at that rate, and then at the year mark we'll renegotiate. And obviously from their perspective, they're thinking we're going to have to get this person up to speed, and that's a lot of undertaking and training. I was like, no, one, you have experience in ophthalmology that no other candidate they're interviewing most likely even has, so you stand out that way. Two, how are they onboarding? What's the structure? Did you ask them what they want to do? A lot of ophthalmology practices that have attempted to do PAs, typically the common story is, oh yeah, we hired a PA, they kind of watched us for 6 months and then it just didn't go anywhere. And I'm like, yeah, that's not the way I would recommend it. And so I teach them, you need to onboard this way. Here's the strategy. Show them while you're still learning and have this huge undertaking in ophthalmology to learn not just pathology, but all our skills. And with ophthalmology, we have a lot of instruments and things like that. So I teach them what things you can do early on to show that you are valuable to paid at a normal salary rate, and you are able to show that you're bringing in revenue while you're still learning. It's not I'm hired, I'm going to watch and do nothing and bring in revenue and then get paid. Yeah. So and that was from my own learning. My first job in ophthalmology, I took a pay cut because I felt for that. Yeah, I haven't done this. You're right. And they kind of used that. What I was shocked was within 1 month, I was full up to speed and now I was severely underpaid. So I do tell people if they are going to pitch that, then negotiate to, I would say if you've had background in ophthalmology, you could probably get up to speed within 3 months. But if you're ground zero, probably about 6 months. So make sure it's not a full year. And so run from anyone that offers you a lower salary for training. I understand there is there is an element to that, especially in ophthalmology from the employer side, like having to hire someone and invest all that time to get them trained, and you don't want them to leave. But if you do it correctly, both parties can be taken care of. And that's, I think, what's important. If both people are taken care of and they recognize we haven't done this probably before, it's going to require grace and a learning curve. But if both people are taken care of, you're going to win. You're going to win.
Yeah. Yeah, I have heard of other people in non-optho specialties that said, "Oh, well, I'm orienting or waiting for my credentialing," or they just ask if I would just come in and shadow, like just like essentially volunteer or get paid an MA salary and start rooming patients. And I have always thought that's a slippery slope because when you're doing that, what you're saying is, I'm okay with getting paid nothing for my time, or I'm okay with getting paid like an MA, and then your license comes through or you're off orientation, and it's hard to flip a switch and say like, oh no, I'm not a tech anymore, now I'm a provider and I expect to be treated as such, because you were at first functioning as this other role.
I completely agree. And I think the other thing I've learned in years of doing this is your annual review and your annual raise is very minimal. The biggest likelihood to get the best salary you want really is upon hire or at a new position or whatever. And so taking that $40,000, it's so hard to increase from there. It's so hard. So don't start low. Yeah.
There's a lot of studies in negotiation that say like the lower you start, the lower you'll end. Like you can't
Mhm.
catch up if you flop. Like, sure you can, but if you flop that first negotiation, or if you do what I did, which I often share about this on the show, I was getting my first job as general surgery PA. They'd never hired anyone before in surgery. They had a couple PAs in ER. And they said, "What do you want to make?" And I had written down in my little portfolio 82 to 85,000. This is years and years ago.
I was gonna
I'm like, that's not what I'm making now. And so they say, "What do you want to make?" And I said 82. Like, why wouldn't I say 85? Like, at least go for the higher number. And they say, "Okay." And I'm like, damn it. I've been
Yeah,
kicking myself ever
yeah,
since then. I'm like, I could have said 98. I could have
yeah,
said 107, right? Like,
yeah.
at least say something that's going to make them talk me down, not like, and they're like, sure. I'm like, they were definitely prepared to pay me more because they said yes.
Exactly. Exactly. Like I learned early on too. It's like sales 101. You never go in with your offer that you actually want. You always go higher. You're going to negotiate. And so you never go in at what you want. And then two, when I've had that too, when they went, oh, sure, no problem. I was like, oh, I could have gotten so much more.
And it's really hard to be like, just kidding.
Yeah.
What I meant was 98. Like,
Yeah. I'm sorry. Did I say 82? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I meant 182, right? You're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's so much to be said for how this process makes you feel. So negotiating stresses everyone out. It makes you sweat. Like no one loves it. We don't learn it in school. But if you are negotiating with an employer, private practice or like massive health network, I don't think it matters. And the vibe that you're getting is like, they're just not willing to budge. They're just not willing to work with you. They make you feel like it's ridiculous that you're even asking for more or requesting a review of like compensation in the area. It's probably not a place that you want to work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, when that and like I'm resonating because it's like, oh, been through that. And it's typically an employer that's like that. In my experience, you learn how they value you when you already have one foot out the door, and suddenly now they want to give you what you asked. And then it's like, okay, you didn't want to do it when I was a part of you and I was part of the team, but now when I'm gone, now it's value. And so then it comes across more slap in the face a little bit. Obviously, again, I don't think that's hopefully makes people attention, but that's actually what I mean by, I don't know if you're familiar with Brené Brown. Love her work. Yeah, love her work. She talks about that really dynamic relationship between compassion and boundaries. And she talks about how you have to have compassion for yourself, your time, your work, your space in order to set a boundary. And however that person receives or responds to it, because you're boundaried and you're rooted in that self-compassion, it has no power over you. And so when you go to these places and ask for a raise or a negotiation, that empowerment, but if you are compassionate for yourself, your time, then it really doesn't matter how they respond to it, because you know where you're at. And that's what I started having to realize is like, wow, like who is defining the value here? Am I allowing someone else to define it, or am I myself? And I think a common theme in personality medicine is, we're so quick to, okay, sure, or yes, set our needs aside. And so to really do that searching and ask yourself, what are my needs and what do I need from this? And if they're not willing to give that, then okay, move on.
If you only take one sheet of paper to your next negotiation, let it be the PA Pay One Sheet. It's a tool designed to walk you through setting up the ideal outcomes, assessing the situation you are negotiating in, and it even includes a reminder of which negotiation skills you can use. Stop what you are doing. Download the one sheet, print it out, fill it out, and literally bring it to the table with you when you are negotiating next. It's designed specifically to work in healthcare settings wherever you are. You can use the PA One Sheet to get the best deal, the biggest raise, and to help your confidence walking into your next negotiation. Head to www.tracybingaman.com/one, that's ONE, to download your free copy of the PA Pay One Sheet and start prepping for your next negotiation today. It's linked in the show notes, but in case you missed it, it's at www.tracybingaman.com/ONE. And I think earlier in my career, I waited too long. I waited to move on until I wanted to burn the whole place to the ground. Like that is too late, right? If you've gotten to the point where you're just like, I despise everything and everyone, and like even the good stuff they do is bad. Like you're just like, you're so far gone that you could be like, I quit, and they could be like $1 million. And you're like, nope, I'm not taking it. Like I'm so far gone. And it's a bad way to leave. Like I've done it and it feels terrible. It's just not, it doesn't feel good. It's hard to do it without burning a bridge. Like it's not the best way to leave. So if you can earlier on identify, what do I need from this job? Because I think oftentimes we see our relationship with our job as like one way. Like I give them. They ask me for this, I say yes. They ask me for this, I say yes. They need someone to join this committee, I say yes. I'm giving. Sure, like I'm cashing the paycheck too. Like it's not completely one-sided, but it's not this back and forth. And then suddenly you realize, oh, I need more flexibility. I need a different schedule. I need something in order for this to be sustainable and for it to work for me during this season. And then it's been 10 years of you saying yes, yes, yes. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, no. It's hard to build boundaries when you didn't have them before. It's a lot easier to go in and say like, this is what I'm willing to do and not willing to do.
And I can, looking back on it, I can see why I was so inefficient at building boundaries, just because I didn't have some of those life lessons learning curve. And so that is, give yourself the grace as you learn to do this, is you pull from your experience. And as you learn, you're going to probably have to unlearn as well. And that can be very hard when you've done 10 years of being a yes, 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 to finally start identifying your needs and being able to say no and not caring how the other person handles that. And so it does take years of, I think, going through some of that mess to figure out, at least for me. But I do, like, if I could go back and, tell my younger self or someone listening starting out, it would be learn to figure out what you need and be boundaried. And you won't maybe have to go through some of the unlearning and learning as much.
And the other thing that I have learned in this process is that working somewhere where the practice, the organization has values that align with yours is worth more than making more money. Like that to me, I figured that out later than I wish I would have. And it's interesting because even in a massive network that has like this corporate, mission statement and these corporate values, you work in this microclimate. So inside of your department, it could be amazing. And you could have a friend that calls you and they're like, this place is the worst. Like, and you're like, how? No, it's amazing over here in cardiology. And she's like, well, the surgery department is the worst, right?
Yes, I completely agree. I precept students clinically. I teach at PA programs, and I do tell them like you may be drawn to an area of medicine, but always keep in mind when you're on rotations, it's not just that, but it's learning what environment do you like that medicine being expressed in. And I found like I loved ophthalmology when I was at Duke. I loved ophthalmology, but I did not like an academic center. That was just not me. And I've worked in private practice before, and now I work for more of a large healthcare network. And same thing, one colleague likes it, one loves it, and it does go down to. I love that you said the microclimate. I think that's such a good word to provide imagery to really what it is. And that's what I mean by like you have to. It goes back to those relationships. It really does. Ophthalmology PAs, because you're just not that many of us, you can make more than your average PA, pretty significantly more, because again, they can't really find someone like you. And so there is going to be this lure to, oh my gosh, look at all this money. But I agree that fades away quickly when in the day to day, if you don't share the same humor and the same like joy and commitment to excellence, then it's really hard to see beyond the person in front of you in that relationship and only look at the dollar sign. It's really not, I think, possible, because at the end of the day, we're both just human beings. So,
Yeah. I think that earlier on in my career, I focused a lot on the content of what I was doing, like what specialty. Okay, I'm going to do general surgery. And it wasn't me saying, I want to work somewhere where I feel seen and supported and where the people I work with love me and I enjoy being around them. I was like, I want to do general surgery. Okay, so that's very different, right? There's thousands of ways you can do it. There's all these different places that you can do it. And so I feel like literally during this conversation, I'm like, I'm going to stop asking my students, like, what specialty do you want to go in? I'm going to start asking them, like, how do you want to feel? They'll look at me so crazy when I do this. Like, how do you want to feel when you're practicing medicine? Like, how do you? Because I have done a handful of different specialties and it doesn't matter as much exactly what you're doing. It mostly matters like how you feel when you walk in the door at work. Are you dreading it? Is it something you look forward to? Do you like the people? Do you connect with your patients? Like, and if you feel good about that thing, all those things, you could be doing anything, any area of medicine. But if you feel good, it's great. And if you feel terrible, it's not worth it, even if you're making tons of money.
yes, I agree. And the tons of money goes along with, I think there is this Western mindset of just you're loved for what you produce, and especially the whole production. That's what they tell you. You are loved for what you produce and bring in. And on the contrary, if you know that you're just loved for who you are, and you do have that self compassion about those things that we talked about earlier, then I think that really takes that edge off of, it really isn't, like you said, about specialty or about all this revenue you bring in. It really just is about, to me, relationships with the patient in front of you, your relationship with yourself and your colleagues. And if you can sit there and go to work and be excited, and I say this out of having a family medicine job that just doesn't match my personality well. And I did not know you can actually have physical manifestations of burnout when it was going on. I never knew that was a thing. I didn't know insomnia was a symptom of burnout, or these like subconscious, I wouldn't say depression. I wouldn't say I had that, but I would say very melancholy. Um, and I remember going through it, not being aware that it was my body's cue telling me this is off. And again, if you don't love yourself for who you are and you're focused on what you produce, you're not even paying attention to yourself. And so we just write it off and you keep going until you eventually realize, really, honestly, retrospectively, I was not a healthy person in that environment for myself and for the people I was taking care of. And I was not healthy to be in relationship with my colleagues. And here I'm seeking, trying to find that from someone else. But really, it was because I was inefficient. And obviously, we all have times where, we're not optimized and we go through life. And so that's really what I have learned in spending that time taking care of yourself so you are in a healthy state for the people that you're going to interact with.
Yeah. I feel like I knew in theory, sure, if you're super burned out, if psychologically, if professionally you're in a really bad spot, you could have physical manifestations.
Yeah.
And then I got burned out and super sick, and I was sleeping from maybe 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. And at 2
Yes.
a.m., I woke up and I was
Yes.
just up
Like your best
for the
friend's the
day.
ceiling. Yeah.
Like, I'm like, here we are. It's 2 a.m. I'm awake. I'm worried about work. I'm thinking about work. I'm dreading
Mhm.
work tomorrow. I can't get back to sleep. Um, and I quit that job in what I call a flaming blaze of FU glory. Like I politely resigned, but really, I mean, that's what it was.
Uh-huh.
And I came home that night and I went to sleep and I slept through the night for the first time
Wow.
in 6 months easily.
Wow.
Like, and I hadn't even left yet. I just told them I had like 30 to 90 days left, like to be determined how long. But my body knew there is a light at the end of this tunnel that is not an oncoming train.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. You can
Yeah.
sleep.
Yes. I love that I can, like, you relate to that. I was pretty shocked at how it's like my body's literally telling me, take a break, take a rest, stop producing. You're not loved by that. Just you're loved for who you are. And this is not who you are. So change it.
Yeah. And I think that slowing down enough, tuning into what our body is trying to tell us and not waiting until we're screaming and sick and in the ER and exhausted and not sleeping and not connecting with people that we love. It's, you know, if that's where you are, that's where you are. But if that's where you're headed, do something sooner rather than later.
Well, for those of you listening, if you're going home to someone, that's the other element that it pulls you from other relationships that aren't work related. And so, like, one thing I learned for myself was I've always enjoyed, using fitness and exercise as a means for just stress relief and burnout. I think that's pretty well known. But I used to do it in the morning before work. And I found, although it's busier at nighttime and although you're tired, I needed that barrier between work and home to help me process through work. So I wasn't processing work at home and bringing that really negative infiltration into the home life and those relationships. And so you got also need to look at, I think, that perspective as you navigate these things, and listen to your family. They know you best as well. And if your partner, significant other, is saying like you're not doing so hot, they're doing it out of genuine concern, not out of, like, I think it's easy to take it personally at times, but that was one thing I learned I had to do, was have some sort of physical barrier between the two. And from, it's an hour or it's 30-minute up lap swim, whatever it is. And that really helps me to pull up to the driveway and go, okay, I can be present because I've done that. Yeah.
As a person, not as a provider, right? To change. Yes. Yeah. From those different roles that you play. So I feel like this brings us to a really great place to wrap up. So I was Googling stalking you before we did this. A little bit. And I saw in one of your profiles online that you said you close every patient encounter with the same phrase. So I want you to share that with us. And you sort of alluded to this a little bit, but are you practicing this advice that you're giving to your patients in your everyday life?
Yeah. So I love that you asked this. I learned through such a dear mentor. She was a preceptor of mine that I've stayed in touch this day, like a total gem of a gem. And I would find myself as a student just watching her and being just totally enamored how she handled. And she always had a way to end the encounter. And I never really thought that was a thing to like close the visit. And so it taught me to like come up with a way to finalize things. One, because you're going to see a lot of repeated patients. And so the last thing they remember is going to be this thing. And then they're going to be able to recite it back to you. So my thing is, I tell every patient, I say, eat colorfully, exercise daily, connect with others, and have fun and worry less. And that way, no matter what they came in, whether it was just the complaint or, as you know, in medicine, there's often things unsurfacing that become a part of the visit. But if that's the last thing they hear, especially if they're going to come back, you can ask them how that's going. But I do think, like you said, am I doing that? Am I modeling that as well? And obviously, patients, they're not keeping me accountable. They're not a part of my life outside of work. But I am thankful to be able to articulate and say that I do truly have integrated that into my life. And so when I am sharing that, it's coming more friend to friend. And so I do enjoy eating colorfully, and I do work out every single day. Um, and obviously, I think I've talked about how much relationships matter. I'm very people oriented, and I'm very oriented more in a present way to time. I think, some people are more past oriented as far as time, future oriented, present. I'm more present. So I think that's helps me kind of connect more. And then the have fun, worry less was one I learned from my mentor who kind of taught me this thing, just to kind of like, if you're not having fun, then you're going to be worried. But if you're having fun, then you're not going to have to worry as much. So, yeah.
It strikes me that this advice that you give, that this statement that you close your encounters with, like you work with a tiny body part that
Mm,
is not like, sure, it's impacted by your habits and your lifestyle, but this is such good, wholesome, global advice. It really speaks to how you see your patients as whole human beings and how you treat them as whole human beings, not like
absolutely.
two pairs of walking eyeballs that happen to wander into your office, right? Like,
Absolutely. I mean, I will say in ophthalmology, that classic saying, right? The eye is the quote window to the soul. And that is one of my favorite things is the eye can be very telling for other parts of the body. And there are ocular conditions, macular degeneration, that thrive off of a diet rich in those colors of foods. And so some of it is applicable, but I hear you. And yes, there is times where I'm like, I don't even probably have to say this, but at the end of the day, it is a person sitting in front of me. And I do want them to know that I care for them, not just for their eyes, but their entire self. And two, if I found like when I was in family medicine, patients didn't really want to see me. It was like I felt like I was taking care of things that like just never really got better, or people didn't really want to make changes. Most people really value their vision, and they're very appreciative of you. And so by the time they're seeing me, they're grateful. So what I started learning was too, like, patients may not go see another provider. So if I'm not telling them these things, just because it's not applicable to ophthalmology, they may not get a chance to hear it again. So if they're in my chair, I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity.
yeah,
Yeah.
in a positive way, and to
Yeah.
leave them with some,
Yes.
encouragement to take on to their
Absolutely.
day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So hopefully that leaves all of you listening with some encouragement as well.
Awesome. Yes, I think that this advice is going to really resonate, and this conversation just from some, I don't want to call us old, but not quite as young as we once were, PAs who have lived through some things.
Yeah. It's weird when you're like teaching people younger and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm getting to that point.
Yeah, I know I'm not as young as I once was because we interviewed an attending last week who was younger than me. And so I was like, I think it's happening. This is it's all downhill from here. It's been a good
I'm
run.
hoping I hope I'm not there yet. I'm 28, so I'm like I think I'm still okay.
You've
But
got a couple of
yeah,
years.
yeah. But I hear you. It's going to be interesting to get to that point for sure.
Yeah. Students start to look younger, you start to get a little gray. It's well earned. That
Yes,
experience is well earned.
absolutely.
Well,
Well, thank
Joel,
you
thank
so
you so
much.
much. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and to increase the visibility of this field of ophthalmology, and also just like negotiating and all the things that we should be doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, for anyone that wants to reach out, you can, Tracy, I'm sure she'll share this across her socials. And then I have Instagram as well, and then my website. So happy to stay connected to anyone out there.
Yeah. We'll link all of that in the show notes so people know where to find you. So thanks so much.
All right. Take care. Bye.
You ever have those situations where you sit down with someone and you just click with them and you share so many of the same ideas and similar experiences, and you just feel this connection of, I feel seen and heard and I feel validated as a part of this conversation? That is how I feel on the heels of this conversation with Joel. It is so great to be able to connect with other PAs, to share their experience, and to increase visibility for fields that are just getting to know the blessing and the value that a PA can add to their practice. So I hope that this episode met you where you are and resonated with you. We will see you next time on The PA is In. Congratulations, you've just joined an awesome club. By listening to a full episode of The PA is In, you are officially on the Unicorn PA team. Welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episode of the show. The life of your dreams exists on the other side of taking action. Keep making small shifts and keep getting better. Your life will improve, your career will soar, and you will have the confidence you need to create your own success. I will see you in the next episode. This PA is out.